Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Yuat. It's Tuesday, May 9th. This is Africa 54. More than 700,000 people flee their homes in Sudan to escape fighting between rival military factions. The World Health Organization says over 600 people have been killed in the conflict. Over 400 people are dead from massive flooding in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and 5,000 more are missing. And about 422 million people worldwide have diabetes, and more than 70% do not know they have the disease. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The death toll from the fighting in Sudan is mounting and now tops 600, including civilians, according to the United Nations Health Agency. The new figures released Tuesday come as representatives of the warring sides continue peace negotiations in Saudi Arabia. The World Health Organization says more than 5,000 people have been wounded in connection with the conflict. Meantime, the Sudanese army says it is committed to resolving the conflict through dialogue, according to Sudan's Special Envoy Dafala al-Hajj. He made the statement in Juba Monday after meeting with South Sudanese President Salva Kiir. He says the Sudanese army is ready to negotiate with the paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces, stressing that South Sudan remains a prime country for facilitating the return of lasting peace in Sudan.
I have full confidence in President Salva Kiir that he will continue his efforts within IGAD, and also he has confirmed that the chairmanship of Sudan should continue, and the incumbent chairman is Sudan, and he is able to lead IGAD to serve the best interest of the region. If instability happens in Sudan, that will impact negatively the whole region. I assure you, we are not warmongers.
Delegates from the Rapid Support Forces and Sudan Armed Forces are currently in Saudi Arabia for talks aimed at opening up humanitarian corridors to provide for essential services to the Sudanese people trapped by the conflict. A United Nations internal estimate predicts that in Sudan, 5 million more people will need emergency aid. This prediction comes just as vital international funding for UN humanitarian appeals is slipping. David Doyle has more.
Halima Yaqub Ishaq fled Sudan's violence with her 5 children. 4 days after arriving in neighbouring Chad, they're yet to receive any assistance.
We are totally dependent on the food given to us by the Chadian families in the next village. We have small children and we can't go to work and leave them alone to starve.
While aid agencies are rushing to distribute food and register new arrivals, resources are tight. And the situation looks to get much worse. Parts of Africa were already facing a deepening set of crises, from drought to floods, as well as a growing list of armed conflicts. The demand for life-saving humanitarian assistance has been growing. Now, after conflict erupted between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, an additional 5 million people in Sudan will need emergency assistance. That's according to an internal UN estimate that said half of them would be children. By October, some 860,000 people are expected to have fled to neighbouring countries, including Chad, which has its own dire humanitarian crisis. But just as demand is escalating, resources are being diminished. Analysis of UN funding data for Africa shows financial support from key donor governments is dropping off. That's on a continent that was already facing a $17 billion funding gap for UN humanitarian appeals even before the latest crisis. Here's the World Food Programme's Executive Director, Cindy McCain, during a visit to Somalia this month.
There is going to be less funding this year. I pray there won't be, but the reality of it is that there is going to be less. And so we're going to have to work on doing more with less.
Aid workers, diplomats and donor government officials say funding gaps are likely to grow. That's as Europe focuses on the war in Ukraine, post-Brexit Britain turns inward, and some lawmakers in the United States target budget cuts. Meanwhile, desperation is growing among Sudan's refugees. On Sunday, Chadian soldiers used whips to beat back dozens of women grabbing provisions in one border village. But every day, hundreds more trek across desert scrubland and dry riverbeds to reach Chad's border, seeking safety. Sat in a rare patch of shade, surrounded by other refugees, Isaac says they're hoping Sudan's crisis can end soon, so they can return home. If not, they will go to look for work. We have orphaned children here, she says, and no one is thinking of how we feed them.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. Earlier, I spoke to Cameron Hudson, Senior Associate in the Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and former Chief of Staff to the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan. I began by asking him if Saudi Arabia can succeed in pushing the two generals to stop the fighting.
Well, it's not Saudi Arabia alone. Washington is jointly chairing these talks with the Saudis. I think that it really depends on the battlefield position for both of these forces. Right now, they're locked in a pitched battle, both sides continuing to believe that they can win. But at the same time, Washington and Riyadh are powerful states, and they need to show some deference to them, which is why I think both sides have sent representatives to these talks. They can't be ignored. At the same time, I think that they are probably not fully committed to the idea of a cessation of hostilities, at least while the fighting is as fierce as it is, and as long as both sides continue to believe that they can win. So I do fear that they might be going through the motions at these talks right now to placate the international community, to avoid pressure and sanctions from the West, but without having any real commitment to making peace at this moment.
So what do you think are the current and long-term consequences of this war for Sudan and the region?
Well, we've already seen just the total destruction and devastation that has been visited on the capital and other cities around the country. So the industrial base seems to have been really destroyed or significantly damaged in the last 3 weeks of fighting. Obviously, there's the human cost of not just the deaths, but the displacement and the destruction of residential neighborhoods from the fighting. So in terms of reconstruction, Sudan was already suffering from a huge economic collapse going back a number of years. So the bill for just getting back to square one is going to be enormous already for the Sudanese. But I think if we look beyond Sudan, we have to continue to worry about the region. We continue to see reports of the Rapid Support Forces reaching out to militia groups in Libya, in Central African Republic. We've now seen Darfuri leader Mini Manawi returning to Darfur, potentially opening up a new front against the RSF there, perhaps drawing in Chadian forces. So again, as this fight continues to be prolonged, I think the risk of other countries becoming more involved is only heightened.
Where do you see Sudan's future?
Well, it's hard to look into the future and see where democracy comes into play, quite honestly, given where we are right now, given the challenges that lie ahead. I think that what needs to happen in the short term to put us on a path that might eventually lead to that is, again, to empower civilian leaders. I think we have seen from the very beginning, from 2019, when a Western coalition forced a kind of forced marriage on the civilians and the military, giving them equal billing in the government. I think we have to get away from that model where we think that the military provides some measure of stability, or that the military has a veto over constitutional decision-making in the country. I think we have to get away from that. We have to prioritize the voice of civilians and put them on the path of leadership. Whether they're prepared to govern or not, I think we have to force that, because anytime that we don't, the military uses that opportunity to step in and to reassert itself and to consolidate its control and its power. And that's what we have to guard against going forward.
That was Cameron Hudson, a senior associate in the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and former chief of staff to the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan. The UN says more than 4 million people in Nigeria's northeast are facing severe food shortages as global aid is stretched thin. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs took journalists to the region to see the dire situation. Timothy Obiezu reports from Maiduguri.
This bustling city does not reflect the terror that lurks on the fringes, Islamist militants at war with the government. But even here, young kids are reeling from the impact of devastating food shortages worsened by conflict. Days ago, Bintu Hassan's 2-year-old son arrived at this hospital ward, wasted and hypoglycemic. She says she's already suffered too much loss.
I gave birth to 4 children, but 2 died due to malnutrition. I have 2 left, and this one is also sick. I was referred to this place.
More than 700,000 kids in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states suffer from severe acute malnutrition, according to the United Nations. The UN says the situation could get worse between June and September, the so-called hunger gap period when foodstuffs from the previous harvest traditionally run out. Last year's bumper harvest was disrupted by Nigeria's worst flooding in a decade.
With 600,000 hectares of farmland destroyed, washed away, there will in the immediate future be serious food shortages.
And there isn't enough food aid to go around. This is Ran, a community near Nigeria's border with Cameroon. Residents say no aid has arrived here in 8 months. Kelu Modu says without much food, she couldn't breastfeed her baby and she became malnourished.
When I gave birth to this baby, there was not enough breast milk to feed the baby with, and the baby started vomiting and also had diarrhea.
The food shortage is in part a result of Russia's war in Ukraine and the recent crisis in Sudan. But officials say Nigeria's inflation and recent currency reform policy also constrained people's ability to buy food. UNICEF Nutrition Manager Karanvir Singh says despite crucial aid diverted to other global emergencies, Nigeria is still getting food supplies.
The global package for different, because of different emergencies in the world, is shrinking. But presently we are well placed. But of course, we would need continued support.
Nigerian security forces have significantly degraded the fighting power of the militants. But the country is still at war, and until that is over, millions will be fighting a different type of war, hunger. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Maiduguri, Borno State, Nigeria.
More than 5,500 people are still unaccounted for in an area in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo where floods killed more than 400 people last week, according to a local official. As the search goes on, shaken survivors are still waiting for food aid. Many dazed survivors were mourning multiple family members killed in the flash floods that swept away entire homes and buried the villages of Bushushu and Nyamakub in South Kivu province. Humanitarian workers are spending days recovering mud-caked bodies from the wrecked villages in Kalehe territory, where days of torrential rain triggered landslides and caused rivers to overflow their banks last Thursday.
That's where I used to live, meaning that's where our house was washed away. My husband was taken. He was on guard duty. He was a policeman and he was washed away while he was working without being paid. His mother and younger brother died as well. I have 5 children left. I don't know where I'm going to put them. Not one family will welcome us and help me take care of them.
Warming temperatures due to climate change are increasing the intensity and frequency of Africa's rains, according to UN climate experts. This can increase the destruction brought on by the floods and landslides that were already common in South Kivu. Poor urban planning and weak infrastructure also make it more vulnerable to such weather events. Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, health reporter Kamiti Kibayasi has more on diabetes in Africa. We'll be right back. In other news, providing simple and cheap healthcare measures to pregnant women, such as offering aspirin, could prevent more than 1 million babies from being stillborn or dying as newborns in developing countries every year, according to a series of papers published in the Lancet Journal. Investigators say autopsies on corpses found in mass graves linked to a religious cult in Kenya reveal missing organs and are raising suspicions of forced harvesting. Exhumations resumed on Tuesday. Kenyan Interior Minister Kithure Kindiki says a total of 112 people have been confirmed dead. And the presidential bid of Ousmane Sonko, a popular Senegalese opposition politician, is in doubt Tuesday after a court of appeal extended his 2-month suspended sentence to 6 months in a libel case. The decision triggered a small protest in Dakar that riot police halted with tear gas. The Ugandan parliament has passed one of the world's strictest anti-LGBTQ bills, mostly unchanged, including a provision for long jail terms and the death penalty. Reporter Davis Mugume spoke to people in Kampala, and here's what some had to say.
I go by names of Isaac, and one alumni of YMCA. About the law what the government passed over the homosexuals, I think, I personally, I don't agree with it, but all I can say, if people of an older age, the adults, they do it passionately, they do it out of no fear, non forced, I think they are okay, and it's okay to do whatever they feel like doing. I personally, I have friends who are homosexuals, the gays and the lesbians. I leave them do what they can. I leave them live their own lives because that's what they love passionately. No matter what you can do, you can't change them as long as that's what they want.
I'm Catherine. According to the law that was passed against homosexuality, I support it. Those homosexuals should be punished because it's really against the law. It's so abnormal. And those guys, they get diseases through that, like cancer, some even die, and that thing tortures them psychologically.
I'm worried about some of the provisions that were not revisited that penalizes journalists who cover what is considered to be homosexuality acts. That's my biggest concern about it. We had thought that by the fact that the president brought back the law and refused to assent to it, that the parliamentarians will consider also some of those provisions. Unfortunately, they only considered the interest of the president and not the interest also of the media. Secondly, the act of homosexuality in Uganda is still considered illegal. Ugandans think that it's a good law that has been passed to protect their values as Ugandans. And as a Muslim, I also support it.
People in Kampala there reacting to the recently passed anti-LGBTQ legislation in Uganda. Now to our health report. About 422 million people worldwide have diabetes, and most of them live in low and middle income countries. Let's turn to health reporter Mkamiti Kibayasi for more.
Hello, Esther. Thank you. Sub-Saharan Africa is in the midst of rapidly expanding diabetes cases, according to World Health Organization. 70% of people with diabetes do not know they have the disease. If it goes untreated, diabetes can increase the risk of stroke, kidney failure, and death. Dr. Anzibet Rugakingira is the National Coordinator for Diabetes Service at the Ministry of Health in Tanzania. He joins me live via Skype from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Welcome, Dr. Rugakingira. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, David.
Do you hear me, Dr. Rugakingira?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Good. Please help us understand what diabetes is and what are some of main causes.
Okay, thank you. Diabetes is a chronic and progressive disease characterized with elevated levels of blood glucose. Diabetes occurs either when pancreas does not produce enough insulin. This is the hormone which regulates blood glucose in the body. And this type of diabetes is referred to as type 1 diabetes or insulin-dependent child-onset diabetes. Or it may occur when the body cannot effectively use the insulin it produces. For example, this is referred as type 2 diabetes, or it's also often called non-insulin dependent diabetes. We also have another type of diabetes which is called gestation diabetes, which is a temporary condition, occurs in pregnancy and carries a long-term risk for type 2 diabetes. Women with gestation diabetes are at increased risk of some complications during pregnancy and delivery, as far as also their infants. People with diabetes may have symptoms like excessive urination, polyuria, or excessive thirst, which is also called polydipsia, constant hunger, polyphagia, weight loss, vision changes, headache, and fatigue. But there are risky for type 2 diabetes, although type 1 diabetes is often unknown as far as its cause is concerned. But for type 2 diabetes, there is interplay between genetic and metabolic risk factors like ethnicity, family history of diabetes, previous gestational diabetes, combined with older age, overweight, obesity, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, and smoking, which increase the risk for this type 2 diabetes. But overweight and obesity really are the strongest risk factors for type 2 diabetes.
What is contributing the high rates of type 2 diabetes in Africa?
Currently, as we have seen, urbanization increasing in low and middle income countries. So lifestyle change in African continent, but also in other lower and middle income countries, contribute to increasing risk or increasing prevalence and incidence of diabetes. We've seen also there is low diagnosis of diabetes in these countries. For example, according to the World Health Organization, only 46% of people living in Africa with diabetes do not know their status. And because of lack of testing facilities and equipment, but also inadequate number of trained personnel to diagnose diabetes. The problem is all the figure is increasing, and it's expected to rise up to 55 million by 2055. So this is really a high time to deal with diabetes in Africa, but also to know how to prevent it.
And what can be done to prevent type 2 diabetes, especially in African context?
There are a lot of interventions based on how we can prevent it, but also how we can control it. But the World Health Organization really has come out and provided some of the interventions which are very cost-effective in a common name called best buys, which are recommended interventions for prevention and controlling of non-communicable diseases, but also including diabetes. The aim is not only controlling diabetes type 2, but controlling the risk factors which create room for all non-communicable diseases, including hypertension, cancers, and other diseases. So the aim is to strengthen the national capacity for the country, but also leadership, governance, multi-sectoral action, and partnership to accelerate the country response to prevent and controlling of non-communicable diseases, including diabetes. So interventions like reduction of tobacco use, reduction of harmful use of alcohol, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, and effective management of diabetes and its complications, which create a room for these interventions.
Thanks, Dr. Rugakingira. Dr. Anzibet Rugakingira works as the National Coordinator for Diabetes Services at the Ministry of Health in Tanzania. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you very much, Mkamiti. Be sure to watch Africa 54's health reports every Tuesday. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in